everyone. Welcome back to the Guatemala Life and Culture podcast. It is episode 5, and today we're talking about education. I'm here with
Dawn.
And I am Jeff. And so let's go ahead and get into it. Education, this is something that it's interesting, and it kind of, again, like anything else, it's that thread we're continuing to pull through every episode it's all intertwined. And so today we're going to talk about what education looks like in Guatemala and then what it's like here. And I formerly worked in the school system, and Don currently works in the school system. So we'll have some stories there. Absolutely. So the first thing, Guatemala and its education system, it's still not great. It's one of those where the illiteracy rate is still very high. So 1 out of 4 people cannot read in Guatemala. 60% of the illiterate in Guatemala are the indigenous population we've been talking about. Female illiteracy is at 61%. Male illiteracy is at 32%. And these figures are from the Mayan Traditions Foundation. Schools in Guatemala are typically underfunded, antiquated curriculum, gender inequality, overcrowded classrooms. So we'll get into that in a second, but I'd be remiss if I didn't go back to our Guatemalan history podcast briefly to say that, again, a lot of the adults did not receive any formal education during that 36-year-long Civil War. And if you didn't listen to that episode, I do encourage you to go back and do so. So Guatemala, the education system there today, it's getting better, but it still has a lot of work to go. And in one of our recent trips, we traveled together, a group of us.
2019.
2019, right? Yeah. So it's been a few years.
Just a few, yeah.
But at that time, we visited an elementary or primary school in the village of Chesh. And when we were there, and this is not dissimilar to any really developing nation in the world. I know you've traveled a lot. I've traveled a lot. And no matter where you go, these kind of schools kind of are very, very similar in these developing areas. So what you'll see and what you see in these classrooms is you might have multiple grades per classroom with one teacher. That's difficult. These classrooms are typically open-aired, and by open-aired, I don't mean like open roof, but cement walls, open windows, to where there's a lot of noise. It can be very difficult to hear, depending on where you are. In Guatemala, not so much because the climate's pretty temperate, but it can be hot, it can be cold. It's not climate controlled. But what you have is a lack of teachers. You have overcrowding of the classrooms, like we've mentioned, lack of furniture, lack of books, anything like that. And we have some visuals here of that visit that the school actually on their school Facebook account posted about our visit there. And when we were there, it never fails in any of these aldeas that, like we talked about before, they know Dover, they know New Philadelphia, they know Tuscarawas County. And when we visited here, typically, like what we're doing with this podcast, is we're presenting on Guatemalan culture, what life is like there. However, when we went there, one of the things that the teacher and the principal or director of the school wanted us to do the next time that we came down, but because of COVID and a lot of reasons, we didn't get down back as soon as we would have liked, is to come back and present on Tuscarawas County, on Dover and New Philadelphia, show them pictures, where their families are located, what school's like here. So kind of the flip side of it all, which I thought was pretty cool. And hopefully we'll still get a chance to do someday. So schools are being built, schools that did not exist when the end of the war occurred in 1996. And we have a visual here. It's a photo of a plaque on the side of a school in Chesh. And the school was able to be built mainly because of money sent back, or remittances is what that called, sent back from people from that village that are here in Ohio. They work, they send part of their paychecks back, And this school was able to be built because of that. And if you remember, if you were a good listener, I briefly mentioned as well that families were coming back after the war to land that wasn't theirs anymore, and they needed to kind of buy that back. So, and we'll get into this with the immigration episodes, but families never really wanted to leave Guatemala. No. Their heart is still there. And you can see that because they're trying to send money back from the States to be able to purchase their land back, to be able to build schools, to be able to build a community that they're proud of and that no one feels like they have to leave. Right. Yeah. But again, we'll get into the more details of that in future episodes. But for today, this school, this picture that you're seeing, this is a committee in the United States and a list of names that live here in Dover and New Philly, and a list of people from the Aldea of Chesh. And it's just really cool to see the names on there, and that this school, that these kids are able to now get an education where previously they couldn't, because their own community members are here in the States making that possible. So most of the schools in Guatemala are public. Guatemala, at the last check of the GDP, they only spent 3% on education. Within the schools, there's usually a lack of social services. So unlike here, you might have, reading specialists and social workers and
teachers.
Numerous other positions that help make a successful educational experience. Well, in Guatemala, typically you have a director and a teacher or two. So how is it structured? Guatemalan schools are structured differently than ours. And we have a graphic up here as well. But they do have a version of preschool. Then they have their kindergarten, which starts at age 6, which is pre-primaria, which is pretty similar to ours. Then they have primaria, which is grades 1, our equivalent to grades 1 through 6. So they would say they're in first year of primary, second year of primary, 6th year of primary. Then this is where it gets confusing for our educational friends here in the States, and even for some of the Guatemalan families, is once you complete 6th primary, you then enter básico, basic. And there's 3 years of that. There's first basic, second, and third. So if you're someone who doesn't speak Spanish, or going back to our language and culture debate, not understanding culture, if you were to hear a student come in, just moved in, and said they were in primer básico, first basic is how that would translate. What level of education would you think that they had?
Sounds like first grade to me.
First grade, right? Or super basic. But essentially what that means is 7th grade. And we've seen some mix-ups with that and the systems, to where, the documentation, they even have some documentation, and it says, they're in first basic or second basic, or third basic, tercer básico. Well, third basic, third grade. No, it's like 8th grade.
Right.
Yeah. Or I'm sorry, 9th grade, basically. So that's another example of not being able to take language for what it is. Like, you have to understand the culture of Guatemala to understand where they're coming from and the level of education that they have. So then what happens after those 3 years of basic, equivalent to our 9th grade, they can graduate. They're finished. So take a student who moves in who might be 15, 16. They've graduated school in Guatemala's system. They could continue on in what's called magisterio, which is kind of equivalent to like a Buckeye Career Center, which is more specific for their next 3 grades or 3 years. But they don't have to.
No.
So when they come here, they might think they're finished. Surprise.
It doesn't.
You have to go to school for at least 3 more years if you turn 18.
Yeah.
So that can cause some confusion as well as to the requirements of education.
Right. I was thinking of, just the classroom that I primarily work with at New Philly High School is what we call our newcomer class or newcomer track. It is comprised of not solely first-time students in New Philly, but typically, yes, yeah. Like if this is their first time, they're new to the States and they have just enrolled in school. They range from 14 to 18 or older years of age, all in a freshman newcomer English classroom or a level, like fundamental freshman level. So their educational background is most likely has gaps in their years, or not. Maybe they've gone up through 7th grade, like we said.
Or acronym.
So typically, we have students that just come from a wide range of, they haven't had ongoing education since they were in preschool up until 8th grade, or at whatever age that they're entering in. But based on they're put in the high school based on age, because there could be some stipulations with putting a 16-year-old in a 7th grade class, even if
I was going to say, if you had
level isn't. Yes.
Yeah, if you had a 16-year-old come and
right.
haven't had any formal education,
right,
you can't put them in a kindergarten class.
No,
so that's the whole
cannot.
purpose of
yes,
these
exactly.
newcomer programs, not just New Philly, but other school districts
Absolutely.
as well have
Yeah.
made that possible.
It's true. Yeah. Yeah. But it is a wide range. Yeah. And so when you're entering a fundamentals of math class, you do pre-testing and different things as much as you can at the beginning. But just the practical application of seeing how students excel in the beginning. And then you can be, teachers can be flexible and advocate for putting that student in a higher level. But sometimes it is just, like we teachers do the best they can, or with this level of class, it's the best freshman level that it can be, because you might be dealing with a bunch of different years and gaps in education.
Yeah, and that can be a tough challenge. And we're going to get more into what this actually looks like, because I think a lot of people in the community don't understand really what that looks like. There's a lot of misunderstandings, and we're going to debunk some other myths with that here today. One of the other acronyms, ELL. We hear ELL. So a few years ago, it was ESL, and I think that's the more commonly understood term, which English as a second language, ESL.
Right. Yeah.
Well, part of the reason, hopefully, as you've learned from our language episode of why it is now ELL, which is English language learner, is English might not be their second language. It might be their third or fourth. So it just implies that this student or this individual is learning English. They're an English language learner, which I think is a great all-encompassing term.
It is.
Because
there is also another one, though. I don't know if you are aware of, it's not officially like this is what we're using now in the state of Ohio or wherever, but I've heard it introduced more multilingual learners.
Okay.
Which that one's kind of a mouthful too, and might have a loophole of it's not specifying an English learner for the first time. So there are some difficulties there, but it could also, at the same time, be stating you already have some languages under your belt, and obviously if you're in a school in the States, you're learning English. So, right. But I agree with you that English language learner is the most specific, because it could be your third language, it could be your second.
Or your first, actually.
Or your first.
So let's start to kind of clear up some myths here. One of the myths is you have students who don't speak English in a school, and everyone gets up in arms at, oh my gosh, that's taking away from my child's educational experience because they're having to cater to these non-English speakers. However, if it's done correctly by a school district, it doesn't negatively take away from any student at all. Correct. Can you explain like the reason that is? And I know it's a little different at the elementary level compared to the middle and high school, but just a little bit about why having non-English or a large number of non-English speakers in a school district doesn't take away from the educational experience of the other.
Correct. Yeah. I mean, a question that I would ask if someone I was having that conversation with someone that was arguing, that point exactly. I would just ask more like specific, well, in what ways? In what ways are the English population, what ways are their educations being halted by allowing a little more time or patience or explanation with a non-native English speaker? And as far as resources go, I mean, it's just, unfortunately, as far as interpreters go, there's just not enough of us that exist, and just
very underpaid group of individuals.
It is true. Yes, thank you.
Not just education, but
no, in general. But so we just really it's not even possible if we wanted to have an interpreter in multiple classes in the high school alone, in the middle school, and to sit down next to a student and interpret everything all the time. I would argue that's not the best education for that student, because they're just getting this regurgitation in a language that, yes, they can understand audibly, but overall that wouldn't be the best method of practice. The idea would be to have this incorporation into the grand whole of the academic experience, which would be, smaller groups with a myriad of speakers, maybe some Spanish, some English. I've seen students who excel at assisting teachers because they are bilingual or multilingual, and they are devoting more time to assisting their fellow classmates by explaining, say, in a health class, and this is exactly where I've seen it take place. So health, gen ed, freshman, sophomore, mandatory class to take. You're talking about different diseases or mental health issues, and it involves a lot of projects. So students make different slideshows and they just look up information, or they'll often create like a broadcast or a little TV promo, and they work a lot in groups or individually. And I've seen it happen where a student who is bilingual was assisting multiple non-English speakers in his classroom, and he was probably receiving a little grace from the teacher as far as if he wasn't devoting all of the time to research his disease, that he was looking up, either, was given some more extra time, or through his explaining to many classmates, that understanding is obviously taking effect in his brain. So I don't see that. Sometimes when you teach, things sink in more. Exactly. Yeah. So, I mean, time spent on attention from teachers to different students. I mean, I can understand where someone could, be arguing that point, that is the taking away. However, I would also... But you don't,
sorry, just pause right there. Ahead. But you're not having someone, and I think this is what is in some people's heads, is you don't have an interpreter standing up front.
No.
And the teacher explains something, pauses, lets the interpreter interpret to maybe a class of 20, and there's only 3 non-English speakers. No. Like, I think that's what a lot of people picture. That's not what is happening.
That is not what is happening. No, there are certain, depending on the size of the classroom and depending on the sensitivity of a topic. So like suicide, in health class, that's a big one that I've been asked from the teacher to help with more sensitive or deep subjects that we really want to make sure we have the clear understanding, instead of just relying on translation tools on their Chromebook.
Yes.
Examples like that. But I will always see if I'm the one interpreting for this classroom and the English speaking students, to them, it's like an extra, they're probably in a Spanish class and they're just getting more exposure.
Yeah. I mean, really it is when you think of the way education really should be, I think you're actually learning more. You're having a more well-rounded experience, and it really isn't taking away from the English speakers' experience as much as people think that it does. Right. And from a teacher's perspective, I mean, a lot of it's up to them on how much they put into it. You know, it's it's different from the elementary and high school, middle school level, as we mentioned. So from how do you best teach a non-English speaker who's in elementary school? It's the same way you teach any elementary school kid. It's modeling, it's showing, it's visualing. It's doing it together. You don't even need anybody. Like we would argue now at the high school level, when you have your more complicated things, I think there is a place, like you're saying, for that interpretation. But really at the elementary level, the reason you would need a bilingual or multilingual aid or interpreter is for the non-academic stuff. So that's communicating with home. It's if there's a behavior issue, making sure the child understands exactly what they are not doing well. Not so much what they're learning. What they're learning, they learn just as well and just as quickly with their classmates. With maybe they're pulled out once or twice a week into a group and they work on their English. But
work on their vowels,
or maybe go over some of the homework and in a way that maybe they understand a little bit better. Right. But the way the elementary school teachers teach it isn't any different, really. No. It's just good practice if they're doing it right. Sure. And just look around our community. Like how many flawless English speaker, Guatemalan kids that we have, that's a testament to the school system and how quickly they can learn English. And, we have kids that are graduating and going off to do way smarter things than I've ever done because of our education system. So it works.
It does. Yeah.
It can be a challenge, but it's not a challenge for everybody. It's a challenge for the individuals that are there to figure out a creative way to work with the students, and a challenge for the teachers in a sense that you just might have to tweak something that you did. Just do it differently, not necessarily more or less.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. And I think at the high school, middle school, high school level, those elementary, as elementary school is, more illustration or modeling or doing together. All of those methods are highly encouraged to just not forget at the high school level. Like, you do have visuals and you have, plenty of stuff like that that's interactive, but that's the best advice that I would have to give. If you don't have access to an interpreter as far as, speaking, this is what we're doing, model it, give simple examples, and start there. And then you can always build on that. I've worked with teachers who are great at modifying assignments so that it still is, the understanding is still taking place, or if they're researching some historical event, they're still doing that research. Yeah. But the size of the paper, would probably be a little bit less. And because that doesn't dictate how much they've understood the assignment if it's less words. Yeah. Really. Think examples like that is what I always try to encourage teachers to remember or to model after the elementary.
And kind of to go on a little different path here now with it all is, you have your formal education, kind of what we've been talking about, but then you just have educational life. And what I've found, and one of the things that different organizations that have worked with the Guatemalan community has tried to do, is provide opportunities for those students and for adults to be able to go do things that otherwise they normally wouldn't do, just because of culture. Maybe they're new and they're unaware of it. But one of the examples I gave is years ago now, we took a group of boys, they're English speaking, most of them, elementary boys up to a Cleveland, at the time, Indians game, now Guardians. Yeah. And the Guardians donated the tickets. We were able to go on the field, and that whole experience for them when they came back to Dover, Philly, now when their classmates or the other boys or girls or teachers were talking about the Indians or the Guardians, they now have that framework in their head and they can engage in that with everybody else.
Oh, yeah.
And they got to feel more a part of the community now because, oh yeah, I've been there. Oh yeah, I know who Jose Ramirez is. He has my same last name. Like there's all these connections that start to happen, which are really cool.
Yeah.
And so like, that's why, field trips are important. If you're reading a book on hockey, and I brought up sports a lot in this podcast, but I'm a sports guy. But if you're reading about hockey and you have the opportunity to go ice skating, that story is going to connect so much more with you. Or, if you are reading about President McKinley in school and you get to go to the McKinley Memorial and see some of the actual stuff from his time, like, oh,
yes.
Which honestly, this has nothing to do with the podcast, but that creepy old woman, robotic woman at the McKinley Museum. If anyone knows what I'm talking about, I don't get it. It creeps me out to this day. And I believe the McKinley Museum does like overnight stuff. And all I can think about is like waking up in the middle of the night at the museum, hearing this like cackling old robot woman.
I
don't know, look it up or go visit. Like it's completely off topic, but it.
Well, stemming from field trips, something new that happened last semester or in the spring was I was able to go. This wasn't set up by the school, by the high school, but it was promoted where an organization or a group of students from OSU were inviting, because some of these students are from Dover community, our area, and they basically started this group that was all about creating awareness for Latino students, bilingual students, or just students from the area who come from Hispanic or Latino background, to be able just to have a campus visit of Ohio State and see that's a huge university, like renowned, just like to hear about. So it could just be a tourist thing, here, you can come see the campus. And when you talk about universities or college, sure, that's not the only one to say this is what they're all like. But those students now, even if they don't pursue further education, they do know what you're talking about, or we're able to say, have that experience. And that just is so much more than explaining what a university is. You get to actually see it. And
so one of the other things, and this is kind of circling back, you just talked about university, now we're kind of going back to the preschool age, Head Start age. The other, talking about younger kids, and there's a lot of programs. I shouldn't say a lot. There's a few programs in our community that have volunteers, whether they're high school aged or adults, that are volunteering to work with the ELL students and kind of give them tutoring or homework help, which is really cool. And just recently, at one of our get-togethers, we heard a story, which I think it would be really cool to potentially have the two of these individuals on as guests to kind of tell their version of it all. But a young lady who received a volunteer tutor from the community when she was young elementary school, and this lady tutored her for years. I don't know how long exactly, but now this young lady is working at a facility where her tutor needs some rehab, physical rehab. Yeah. And this young lady is now going to be her physical therapist.
That's so cool.
So it goes from this woman investing her time in this young ELL student to now that student has become her physical therapist. And what made it even more cool is this lady is this student's first patient. And so I think it's just really cool to show it. and we'll start to wrap up this episode at this, is there can be a lot of negativity. I think there's always this idea of this current of they're taking away from us. They being the Guatemalans or the immigrant group is taking away from our community and what we value so dearly. Right. But when you look at it and you start to look at some success stories and you look at how things actually work, it's only adding to the community. It's not taking away anything. It's not taking away from your child's education. It's not taking away your jobs, which we'll talk about in a future episode. There's kind of all these myths that are out there that when you really look at the individual stories, it isn't actually true. And, you know, and I'm going to say this and you're probably going to hear me say it again. If you were to put 1,000 Guatemalans in a room, it would be just as diverse if you had 1,000 Anglo or English people in a room. You're going to have good parents. You're going to have bad parents. Absolutely. You're going to have smart people. You're going to have challenged people. You're going to have all these variety of people within it. You can't just group them all together. Right. So even and through this podcast, you know, we're talking about some generalities as well as some specific scenarios. But when you have a large population, there's going to be diversity within diversity.
Yes, and that's important to remember.
Yes. And so whether it's with education or anything else that we've talked about, just kind of remember, like, it is a case-by-case basis, but what we hope we're doing is kind of pulling back that curtain a little bit to let you see it isn't as scary or detrimental or confusing as it needs to be.
Oh, that makes sense. I agree. Yeah.
Anything else on education that you like to cover? I know we could probably talk for
lifelong learners. That's what we try to be. Yeah.
Lifelong learners. Yeah. And, you know, props to all the teachers and educators out there, because it is, you know, it can be overwhelming with, like, what do I do? What do I not do? Yes. You know, looking for resources, but they've done, for the most part, a great job. And I think the school districts, they know what they need to do. And you have plenty of people in the community willing to help make those goals obtainable.
Yeah. And last thing I'll say is, like, building relationships. And it's probably cliche, but it just with in education in general, you know, building a relationship or rapport with your students goes so much further than just, you know, giving all this information without relationship. And when done the right way, that's what's going to be remembered. The passion of the teacher to care for you as a student, to listen to you, just to take a few more minutes out of your time, have that patience, have that listening ear. Even if you don't understand, you're trying to understand. You're showing them that, you know, they're important and you're in their corner. That speaks volumes. And hopefully those lifelong lessons of how to be decent human beings will go further than just the, you know, the content that you're giving them.
Absolutely. And in our world today, you know, it, like it or not, it is a diverse world. And if you really want to do anything of meaning, you're going to have to learn how to work with people of other backgrounds, other belief systems that are different. And what better way than in our schools today to get a head start on that experience. And I'll end it with this. I think I've heard people mention this as well. One of the cool things about being in the elementary schools is they don't see the skin color as much as you might as an adult. Like, it's there. Yeah. But to them, oh, that's just Jose. Yep. Oh, that's just Maria. That's what it is. It has nothing to do with any of the negative things that we see until that is learned later on. So we hope you've enjoyed this episode on education. Again, just there's so much that we could have done beyond what we've talked about. But if you do have more questions, if you'd like to have further conversations on really anything that we talked about, please, our information is linked to this episode, and we just encourage you to reach out. We thank you for taking the time to hopefully learn a few more things about our Guatemalan neighbors, and we look forward to seeing you in the next episode.